Have you ever been in a room full of people you love and still felt completely invisible? I have. There was a time when my voice filled the house, when every decision passed through me, every doubt came to me, and every meal carried the warmth of my hands. I was the one they called first, the one who knew where everything was, the one who could sense when something wasn't right, just by the silence on the other end of the line. I was the heart of this family, but somewhere along the way, the voice got quieter. Not because I stopped speaking, but because they stopped listening. I don't know when it began exactly. It wasn't one big moment, it was subtle. A few ignored suggestions here, a laugh when I said something they thought was old-fashioned, a decision made without even asking me. At first, I thought it was just the pace of life, people being busy. I told myself not to take it personally, but then it became a pattern. I'd speak, and someone would interrupt. I'd offer an idea, and it would be brushed off. I'd start a story, and someone would look at their phone. So, I learned to hold it in, to keep quiet, to nod and smile, to pretend I didn't have something to say, not because I had nothing to offer, but because it felt like my words no longer had a place. I used to be part of every conversation. Now I sit in silence, watching them talk around me, about me, sometimes even for me, but rarely to me. You ever feel that? Like you're slowly disappearing while you're still here. Like the more you try to keep the peace, the more you lose your place in your own family. It's a strange kind of loneliness, the kind that hides behind smiles at the dinner table, the kind that creeps in even when the house is full. Some might call it respect. We don't want to burden you, they say. Or, you've done enough, now just rest. But what they don't see is that silence isn't peace when it's forced. It's not rest when you're left out of your own life. I didn't stop having thoughts. I didn't stop being a woman with opinions, with feelings, with insight. I just stopped saying them out loud because no one seemed to care anymore. I know I'm not alone. I've seen it in the eyes of other women my age. We sit quietly in family gatherings, smiling, helping, always available, but slowly fading in importance. We go from being the center of everything to being an afterthought. And it's not that our families mean harm. I truly believe they love us. But somewhere between growing up and growing older, something shifts, and the respect we once had turns into pity, or worse, dismissal. What you're about to hear isn't just a personal story. It's something many mothers go through, but rarely talk about. Out of fear, out of loyalty, out of love. We hold it all in, thinking it's better not to stir the waters. But the truth is, silence has a cost. And the longer we stay quiet, the more invisible we become. What happens when you're no longer part of the decisions that shape your own life? When your opinions are seen as outdated? When your presence is expected, but your voice is not invited? What I've lived and what I'm about to share might sound familiar to more people than we think. Fica comigo até o final. Because the truth behind this silence might just open your eyes to something you hadn't seen before, something real. Something that hurts in ways no one likes to admit. And now, I want to go even deeper into this. And maybe you've felt it too, that quiet ache of being left out, even when your heart is full of things you want to say. Maybe you've held your tongue out of respect, out of fear, or simply because it seemed easier than being ignored again. If this is stirring something inside you, if you've ever swallowed your voice just to keep the peace, I want to invite you to share it. Leave a comment, even just a few words, and tell me what part of this touched you most. Because I believe these stories deserve to be heard, and sometimes, writing it down is the first way we take our voice back. If this kind of conversation makes sense to you, if it speaks to something you've been holding in, give the video a like. It may seem like a small gesture, but it helps this message reach other people who need to hear that they're not alone. And if you want to be part of more moments, como, esse, honest, human, unfiltered, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. That's how we keep criando esse espaço, where voices that have been quiet too long finally get to be heard. You being here, reading, listening, feeling, that matters, more than you know. And now, let me take you a little further into what this silence has really meant for me. I used to believe that love was enough, that giving tudo de mim, a minha família, seria o suficiente para me manter ali, firme, no coração das decisões, das conversas, da rotina. I didn't need recognition or applause. I didn't even expect gratitude. I just wanted to feel part of it too. Know that my presence, my voice, still held a place at the table I spent years setting for everyone else. But with time, I noticed the shift. Small things at first. A birthday dinner planned without asking what I wanted. A doctor's appointment I wasn't consulted about, just told when to show up. Then came the jokes. Mom forgets everything. Don't ask her. She's old-fashioned. We've got it handled. They laughed. I smiled. But deep inside, a quiet sadness began to grow, and with it, the seed of silence. It wasn't just that they were deciding things without me. It was that I started to believe they didn't even realize I had something to say. So I stopped offering, stopped inserting myself. I told myself I was being humble, respectful, wise. But the truth is, I was retreating. I was learning to disappear from my own life, little by little. Not out of bitterness, but out of a need to protect what was left of my dignity. Because nothing stings quite like speaking and realizing no one is listening. I don't say this to blame, I say it to be honest, because this is the kind of truth that lives in the corners of many homes, unspoken, but deeply felt. And the impact it has is not small. It changes the way we see ourselves. It shifts the foundation of our identity. When you are no longer included in the conversations that shape your world, you start to question whether your place in that world is still real. Or, if it was simply a role you once played, a role that ended without warning. That's the transformation no one talks about. Not the one in your body, but the one in your mind. This shift in your mentality, from confident to cautious, from expressive to hesitant. You start second-guessing your words before they even leave your mouth. You learn to calculate the tone, the moment, the audience, and most of the time, you just decide it's not worth the risk. Better to be silent than to be dismissed again. But that silence has a cost, and not just for me, for the whole family. Because when a voice like mine is pushed to the side, so is the wisdom that voice carries. The perspective shaped by years of love, of mistakes, of difficult decisions, the emotional compass that helped this family navigate through loss, through change, through growth. All of that gets buried beneath a layer of assumptions and noise. And I wonder, how did we get here? How did we go from shared decisions to quiet exclusion? From laughter around the table to one-sided conversations where I just nod along. Somewhere along the journey, love got tangled with control, protection turned into dominance, and the line between care and silence blurred until I could barely see it myself. I'm not asking for control. I'm not trying to take the spotlight back. I'm just searching for a space to exist again. A space where my thoughts don't have to be filtered or adjusted to be accepted. A space where I don't have to prove that I'm still capable of thinking, feeling, choosing. A space where I can breathe as myself, not as a version people find easier to manage. There's something deeply human in wanting to be heard, and something deeply painful in being consistently ignored. When that becomes the norm, the emotional impact isn't just about sadness, it becomes a form of erasure. And no one should have to feel erased while they're still alive. So today, I'm choosing to speak, not with anger, but with truth. Not to blame, but to remember who I am, and to remind others that I'm still here. Because what happens when we stop being heard is that we slowly stop being seen. And when that happens, we begin to disappear, not physically, but emotionally, socially, spiritually. And that kind of disappearance is the hardest to come back from. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Because if it does, if any part of this echoes something you felt but haven't said out loud, maybe it's time we start changing the silence together. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject. I wasn't always silent. There was a time when my voice filled every corner of this house, when people would pause to hear what I thought before making any decision, big or small. I remember those days so clearly, not because I missed the control, but because I missed the connection. Back then, I was part of the conversation. Not just the logistics of life, but the heart of it. They trusted me, relied on me, and not just for meals or reminders, but for guidance, for clarity, for comfort. My opinion mattered. It held weight, whether it was about choosing a school, navigating a crisis, or even picking the color for the living room wall. They asked me, they listened, and even if they didn't always agree, they made space for what I had to say. That space, that mutual respect, was a kind of emotional currency, and it made me feel alive, present, involved. I wasn't just someone who did things for the family, I was in the family, in every sense of the word. I look back at those moments, and I see a woman who stood with both feet firmly planted. Not because life was easy, Far from it. But because I knew who I was in that world. I had a role, a rhythm. People came to me when they were hurting, when they needed to make decisions, when they didn't know what came next. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, and it came from a place of lived experience, of countless decisions made in quiet sacrifice. It wasn't about being in control, it was about being part of something, being consulted, valued, noticed. There was meaning in knowing that when I spoke, it echoed somewhere, that my words helped shape the path forward, even when things felt uncertain. That kind of inclusion builds confidence. It gives you the courage to keep showing up, even when the days are hard, even when your own body starts slowing down, because you feel seen. But the irony is, I never asked for that role. I didn't demand respect, I earned it, over years of listening, caring, fixing things behind the scenes without being asked. That's what most mothers do, isn't it? We hold everything together so well that people forget how much effort it takes. And maybe that's where the shift began. Maybe they got used to things running smoothly and forgot that it wasn't magic, it was me. The decisions I made back then weren't always easy. Sometimes I had to choose between what I wanted and what the family needed. I gave up parts of myself, put my dreams on hold, reshaped my own life around theirs, not because I had to, but because I loved them that much. Every step I took was rooted in something deeper than duty. It was rooted in devotion, in identity, in purpose. And when you've lived that way, giving, guiding, anchoring, it's a shock to wake up one day and realize you're no longer part of the decision making, that people talk over you, not with you, that plans are made, and you find out after the fact that your advice is met with a smile and a change of subject. It's not that you stopped being capable, it's that they stopped believing you were. That kind of transition doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in through small, almost invisible moments. A conversation you weren't invited to, a choice made without your input, a glance exchanged between others in the room after you speak like they're humoring you, and slowly, you begin to step back, not out of peace, but out of wariness, out of the quiet realization that you're no longer being included in the parts of life you once helped build. But the truth is, I haven't changed as much as they think. My hands may be slower, my back may ache in the mornings, and my memory may fumble a word here and there, but my insight is still sharp. My love is still steady, my instincts are still strong. That woman who helped carry this family forward still lives inside me. She's just been waiting for a space to speak again. Comment there. I'm on this journey too, because if you felt this shift from being needed to being ignored, then maybe this isn't just my story. Maybe it's ours. I didn't stop speaking all at once. It happened little by little, moment after moment, until one day I realized that the sound of my own voice had become unfamiliar, even to me. There's something incredibly painful about feeling your words fall flat in a room that used to light up when you spoke. I remember the first time I truly noticed it. I was sharing a simple idea during a family conversation, just trying to contribute, like I always had. Before I could even finish, someone cut me off, changed the subject, like I hadn't even said anything. It stung, but I brushed it off, told myself maybe they were just distracted, maybe it wasn't the right time. But then it happened again, and again. I'd start a sentence, and someone would sigh or check their phone. I'd offer a suggestion, and it would be dismissed with a smile. The kind of smile that carries no real acknowledgement, just a polite way to move past you. And then came the worst part, the laughter. Not mean-spirited, not cruel, but still heavy. The kind of laugh that says, "Oh, Mom doesn't really get it," or "That's so old-fashioned." They didn't even realize they were doing it. But I did. I felt it. Every time. And slowly, I started shrinking inside my own home. So I stopped sharing. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because saying it had started to hurt. I stopped offering my thoughts at the dinner table. I let them make plans without me. I nodded when decisions were made, even when they affected me. I convinced myself that staying silent was the kindest thing I could do for them, and for me. But deep down, it didn't feel kind. It felt like surrender. Like I was stepping out of a life I had helped build because there was no more space left for me in it. There's a truth hidden in those quiet choices. A truth most people overlook. When someone stops speaking, it's not always because they're at peace. Sometimes it's because they've been made to feel like their voice no longer belongs. Silence, in these cases, isn't serenity, it's survival. It's a way of protecting yourself from the slow erosion of dignity that happens when you're talked over, brushed aside, or forgotten mid-conversation. And once you enter that silence, it becomes harder and harder to come back out. You start to question everything. Was my idea really silly? Did I actually misunderstand what they were saying? Maybe I'm the one who's changed, who's out of step. That kind of self-doubt doesn't show up loudly. It creeps in, slowly shifting your sense of worth until the woman who used to lead, to comfort, to offer wisdom, becomes someone who only listens, who only follows, who no longer interrupts the flow. I can still recall a moment that haunts me. They were discussing a family trip, something simple. I mentioned a small suggestion, just a detail about the dates, thinking it might help. One of them looked at me, half smiling, and said, "Don't worry, Mom, we've got it all figured out." I nodded, like I always do, but something inside me pulled back. Not because I was angry, but because I suddenly understood. They weren't asking me anymore. They were managing me. And that realization carried a quiet heartbreak I wasn't prepared for. This isn't about needing control. It's not about wanting everything my way. It's about feeling included in the moments that matter. The decisions, the laughter, the small daily things that make life feel shared. Because when you're no longer included, you stop feeling like you're really living in the same world as them. You're just nearby, present, but not part of it. And it's strange how quickly you learn to protect yourself. You begin editing your words before they even leave your mouth. You stay quiet not because you've run out of thoughts, but because you've run out of room to place them. Silence becomes a form of self-respect. If no one wants to hear, why speak? And yet, that very silence becomes a source of isolation. You don't just feel alone. You begin to feel unnecessary. I never wanted to become invisible. I never imagined that after years of holding this family together, I'd have to fight just to feel seen again. But that's what it feels like. A slow fading, a vanishing act no one else seems to notice. And the hardest part is knowing you're still full of ideas, of warmth, of love, but the space to express them has quietly closed. Right there. This makes sense to me. If any part of this sounds familiar, if you've ever felt the quiet sting of being unheard, maybe it's time we say it out loud, together. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the hardest part of being silenced isn't just what they stop hearing, it's what you start believing. The silence on the outside becomes a voice on the inside, and it doesn't come all at once. It starts quietly, like a question, a whisper, something you'd never imagine asking yourself. Do I still matter? That question settled into my chest like dust. At first, I tried to brush it away, told myself it was just a phase, that families get busy, that maybe I was reading too much into things. But it stayed. It grew in the pauses between words, in the quick glances exchanged when I spoke, in the decisions made as if I didn't exist in the equation. And little by little, I started to internalize the message they weren't saying out loud, that I had become optional. It's one thing to be alone, it's another to feel unnecessary. When your presence becomes routine instead of essential, when your voice becomes background noise instead of something to consider, something breaks quietly inside you. And I don't think people realize how deep that fracture can go. It touches places even you forgot were still tender. You find yourself hesitating before speaking, editing your thoughts, questioning your own instincts, not because they're wrong, but because you've been taught that they no longer carry weight. I used to walk into a room and feel like I belonged there. I used to feel like I added something, a story, a memory, a solution, a spark of warmth. Now, sometimes, I sit in that same room and wonder if anyone would notice if I left. Not because they're cruel, they're not, but because they've moved on in ways that no longer leave space for who I am now. Or worse, who I've always been. And that creates a kind of loneliness that's hard to describe. It's not the kind you can fix with a phone call or a visit. It's the kind that sits with you even when people are around. The kind that makes you feel like a ghost in your own life, visible but not really seen, spoken to, but not really heard. And over time, that loneliness starts shaping the way you see yourself. You stop dressing up for gatherings. You stop offering your opinion. You stop suggesting recipes or rearranging the living room or starting conversations because somewhere along the way, someone convinced you, directly or not, that those parts of you no longer matter, that they're old, outdated, unnecessary, but those parts are you. They're the pieces of yourself that held everything together for years. The wisdom, the creativity, the emotional labor no one ever asked you to document. They're the soft hands that comforted, the eyes that noticed what others missed, the quiet resilience that endured more than most will ever understand. And yet, in this phase of life, those qualities get overshadowed by assumptions about what it means to age. There's a truth hidden behind many smiles in older women's faces, the feeling of having gone from the center to the sideline, from being the one people turn to the one they talk over. And that shift doesn't just sting, it rewires something inside. You start to carry a weight that isn't yours alone. It belongs to a culture that values productivity over presence, volume over wisdom, and newness over depth. I began to feel like I had to earn my place all over again. But how do you prove your value when your history is no longer seen as relevant? How do you remind people of what you still carry when they've stopped asking? That's the kind of emotional isolation that doesn't show up in conversations. It shows up in how slowly you start to fade from them, and in how quietly you learn to accept it. I didn't want to stop speaking. I wanted someone to notice that I hadn't said anything in a while and ask me why. I wanted someone to say, "We haven't heard your thoughts on this. What do you think?" Not out of obligation, but out of genuine curiosity. Because that's what being seen looks like. It's not about being praised, it's about being asked. The truth is, the silence from others didn't hurt as much as the silence that grew inside me. The way I started holding myself back. The way I started believing I had nothing left to add. And I think that's the most dangerous part of being silenced, when you begin to agree with it. Right there, this makes sense to me. If any of this echoes something you've lived, or maybe something you're just now starting to recognize, your voice matters too. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because this silence, this quiet disappearance, doesn't just happen by chance. There's something underneath it. Something in the way our families evolve, in the way society teaches us to look at aging. It's not just about one child not listening, or one moment where your voice was ignored. It's part of a much bigger transformation that happens slowly and quietly in families everywhere. And when you begin to see it, really see it, it changes the way you understand what's happening around you. One of the things I've come to realize is how natural, and yet how dangerous, the reversal of roles can be. It starts innocently. A child becomes an adult, starts taking responsibility, begins offering help, and we, as parents, welcome that. It feels good to see them strong and capable, but somewhere along that path, the roles begin to flip too far. We go from being respected advisors to being treated like people who need constant correction. The child, once guided by us, now guides us, not with partnership, but with superiority. And we, often out of love or fear of conflict, let it happen. I've heard experts refer to this as role reversal fatigue. Dr. Harriet Lerner, a psychologist and author, explains that many adult children unconsciously begin to manage their parents instead of relate to them, not because they're cruel, but because they're scared. Aging, for them, represents something uncomfortable, something they don't want to look at too closely. Watching a parent grow older is a reminder that time is moving, that mortality is real, and that they, too, will one day be where we are now. And instead of processing that truth with empathy, they try to control it, organize it, fix it. But aging isn't a problem to be solved. It's a stage of life that still carries wisdom, beauty, and voice. When our children forget that, they don't just rob us of our autonomy, they rob themselves of the opportunity to keep learning from us. That's one of the greatest tragedies of this dynamic, the assumption that aging equals irrelevance, that once you've passed a certain number of years, your thoughts are outdated, your ideas too slow, your presence too fragile to be part of real life. That's the myth. We're up against the myth that older people don't understand, that we slow things down, that we complicate the process. And yet, I look back at my life and see nothing but decades of problem solving, compromise, endurance, and love. I've navigated storms my children haven't even imagined yet. I've made sacrifices they still benefit from. But when they look at me now, they don't always see that history. They see an older woman who takes longer to finish a sentence, or who doesn't quite grasp the latest app, or who asks the same question twice. What they forget, and what I try to remind myself, is that my value was never in how fast I could move or how up to date I was with the world. my value came from who I am, from my ability to listen, to hold space, to carry generations of experience in silence and still show up with love. That kind of depth doesn't fade with age. In fact, it grows, but only if the people around us are still willing to see it. And it's not just about how they treat us. It's about what they learn to fear, and what that fear turns into. When adult children start to take over, they often believe they're doing what's best. "I'll take care of it, Mom," they say. "Don't worry, we've got this." But buried in those words is a message: you're not needed here. And even when it comes with good intentions, that message has impact. It changes how we feel in our homes, in our families, in our skin. I've come to believe that one of the truths we avoid the most is this: when our children are afraid of seeing us grow older, they try to shrink us down into something they can manage. But we were never meant to be managed. We were meant to be honored, consulted, treasured, because we don't lose our minds just because our hair turns gray. We don't lose our hearts just because we walk a little slower. If anything, the years sharpen what matters and strip away what doesn't. But to be treated with dignity in this stage of life requires something deeper than love. It requires understanding. It requires a shift in mentality, a willingness to look past the surface and ask, what wisdom is still here? What perspective am I missing? And sadly, many don't ask that. They move forward with the assumption that they know more now, forgetting that everything they know came from someone like me, someone who walked before them and tried, in every way possible, to pass down not just information, but strength. So yes, this silence hurts. But what hurts more is that it didn't have to be this way. If only they could see that we're not trying to hold on to power. We're just trying not to lose the last threads of identity we've spent our lives weaving into this family. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Because if you've ever felt the weight of being seen as less, when you know you're so much more, maybe this is the conversation you've been waiting for. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there's something so quietly heartbreaking about the way we begin to disappear in the minds of those we helped shape. And what's most painful is that it doesn't come from cruelty. It comes from forgetfulness. A gentle, passive forgetting that mothers like me feel down to the bones. Our children don't always mean to ignore us, but in their rush to live, to solve, to move forward, they stop looking back. And in that, they forget that we're still living too, still growing, still feeling, still full of stories and perspective and vision. The truth is, I have not stopped having ideas. I have not stopped caring. I have not stopped wanting to be part of this family in a real, active way. I don't want to control their lives. I don't want to decide things for them. That part of my journey has passed. But what I do want, what I believe every parent deserves, is to participate, to be considered, to be asked, "What do you think?" And to know it's not just a courtesy, but a question asked with genuine interest. Because even now, I still see things they can't. That's the power of experience. We see patterns. We notice emotional shifts. We sense what's behind the words, because we've lived long enough to understand what people rarely say out loud. And sometimes, when I watch them make decisions, I hold back my thoughts not because I have nothing to offer, but because I've been conditioned to believe they don't want to hear it. But the truth is, what I have to offer isn't outdated. It's timeless. It's not about giving instructions. It's about offering perspective. It's about saying, "I've been there," and meaning it. There are moments when I see the struggle in their eyes, when they feel overwhelmed by life, by parenthood, by choices. And I want so badly to remind them, I've walked that road. I've carried that same fear. I've had those same sleepless nights. But I stay silent, because somewhere along the journey, the lines blurred. My voice, once sought after, now feels like an intrusion. And that's the tragedy. We talk about the wisdom of elders, but we don't always practice it. We quote proverbs, hang family pictures on the walls, celebrate traditions we barely understand. But we forget to ask the very people who lived those stories. We forget that their memory isn't just a record, it's a guide. A map we could be following if only we slowed down long enough to listen. I have lived through transformation. Through heartbreaks and victories. Through sacrifices and celebrations. I've had to make hard decisions with no one to fall back on. I've held my family together when things were breaking apart behind closed doors. That kind of resilience doesn't vanish with age. It settles deeper. It becomes quiet wisdom, and it deserves to be invited to the table, not stored away like old furniture. Sometimes I want to tell my children, I'm still watching you, still cheering for you, still proud of you. But I also want them to look at me and remember, I'm not done, I'm still here, still becoming, still learning. I want them to stop seeing me as someone from their past and start seeing me as someone in their present, because I am, not as the main character anymore, but as a witness, a partner, a contributor to this chapter. That's all I ever wanted. Not obedience, not authority, just respect, just presence, just the simple acknowledgement that even though the years have changed my face, my heart still beats with love, still holds the stories, still carries the wisdom that shaped this family from the start. So if this makes sense to you, if you've ever felt like you're being pushed into the background of a life you helped build, right there, I'm on this journey too. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because I believe that silence, when chosen, can be powerful. But when imposed, when it grows from years of dismissal and being overlooked, it can become a quiet kind of suffering. For too long, I believed that staying silent was the right thing to do, that by not speaking, I was protecting harmony, avoiding conflict, being wise. But silence isn't always wisdom. Sometimes it's self-erasure, and that's not something I want to model for anyone who comes after me. There was a time when I measured my worth by how needed I was. I thought that if I was no longer the one keeping the house running, making the big decisions, offering solutions, then maybe I had no place left. But that's not the truth. The truth is that value isn't measured by utility. It's measured by presence, by the depth of a life lived, and the courage to keep showing up with heart and dignity, even when no one asks. And today, I'm showing up again not with answers or demands, but with something just as important, my voice, not loud, not angry, but steady, unapologetic. I speak because I want to be part of this chapter, not just a footnote in someone else's story. I speak because I still feel, still dream, still love, and because I've realized something vital, that being quiet never guaranteed being respected. My silence didn't bring peace, it brought distance. And what I want now is connection. Real, honest, human connection. The kind that sees beyond wrinkles and titles, beyond old roles and assumptions. The kind that hears a voice not as an echo from the past, but as a living presence here and now. So, to anyone watching who's felt the same way, pushed aside, talked over, treated as though your best days are behind you, I want to say this: your voice matters. Not because it used to, but because it still does. Because who you are today, with all your memories, your battles, your insights, your quiet strength, it still has power. It still holds meaning. Let them call it aging. Let them think we've slowed down. But in truth, we've just shifted gears. We don't need to shout to be heard. We just need to speak with truth. And sometimes the softest truths carry the loudest echoes. I don't want my children to listen because they feel guilty. I want them to listen because they care. Because somewhere deep down, they still remember who I am beyond the labels of mom or grandma or old lady. They remember the woman who once held their hand, wiped their tears, made hard decisions, and stood tall when life got heavy. That woman is still here, a little older, yes, a little quieter, maybe, but still strong, still alive, still worthy of being heard. So I choose not to disappear into the background of their lives. I choose to stand in the light of my own story. And I choose to tell it, not because I expect the world to stop and listen, but because I need to know that I didn't let it fade away without a trace. I've lived through enough seasons to know that the world won't always make space for you. Sometimes you have to claim it yourself. And this moment, this voice, these words, this is me claiming mine. I learned to be silent, but today, I choose to speak, because my voice didn't die, it was just waiting to be heard. Comment there, that makes sense to me. And if you've made it here with me, all the way to the end, thank you. That already tells me something about you, that this story, this truth, touched something inside. If this message stayed with you, leave a comment saying I'm with you until the end. I'd love to know who stayed, who felt, who walked with me through every word. If this kind of conversation means something to you, if you see the value in opening a sparkle for voices that are often left behind, consider subscribing to the channel. That's how we keep building this space together, one story at a time. And if this video moved something in you, give it a like, Not just for me, but so this message can reach someone else who's waiting quietly to feel seen.